Well, good evening, and thank you all for joining us. Welcome to this special edition of The Doctor Is In. No, there's nothing wrong with your Facebook right now. Yes, you see Ricky Fairley and Dr. Bo here again for another hour. So I was able to beg and follow the Thanksgiving sword to get them to come here and say, we need to do a special show. So tonight's show is a special Thanksgiving conversation. So we know we're getting to the holiday season. We're starting to visit with friends and family. Valerie and I were talking about before we got on the air about she got family coming in. I got family flying in. I was just with them earlier. So, but we're going to have we need to have some real conversations with our family. I know we want to talk about uncle this and grandma that and this and that, but there are some conversations that we need to have. And those conversations are about health. We need to get a comprehensive family history for to really help our own personal health. So if we know what's happening in our family, we could take those precautionary measures to probably, hopefully, prevent some things. So we're going to have this conversation here. We're going to tell you the numbers that you need to know, those life-saving numbers that you all need to have to discuss and say, oh, did grandma have hypertension? Did uncle have hypertension? Do you have high cholesterol? Do you have diabetes? So we're going to have those conversations. We're going to tell you how to have those conversations with your family this holiday season. So sit back, relax. We got a great show planned for you. But I'm not the only person here. As you can see this on the screen, we've got the incomparable Ricky Fairley and Dr. Bo in the building. Good evening, ladies. Thank you all for giving us some more time this evening on the eve of Thanksgiving.
So great to be here, Ellis. So great to have you with us.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Welcome to our show. I heard a rumor. I started a rumor that you promised a sweet potato pie in exchange for all this participation. So I'm kidding.
I'm sending patty pies to everybody. Everybody get a patty pie.
Everybody gets a pie.
And it's a good segue to talk about, though, because Patty's position on health has changed over the years as she's gotten to be diagnosed as a diabetic. And I guess we should introduce our other panelists, but then let's talk about some of those changes that we've seen in, really prominent people and like what's happening. We're waking up, I think. And I want to talk about that awakening. So let's introduce our rest of our panel first.
So we have our partners in crime with us. We have Haley, my daughter, who's now works for Touch as our director of partnerships and programs, and my partner in crime and co-founder Valerie Worthy, the nurse navigator diva of all time, and one of my people I go to, like, hey Val, what does this mean? So you see the brains behind Touch. So we're so happy to talk about this. And I think we started talking about this last year about this time, Ellis, and I was talking to Reggie about Thanksgiving and how I don't understand why Black families don't talk about health. And so I kind of had to force these conversations on my family. Mm-hmm. And I did at Thanksgiving because I'm the cook. So I said, you know what? Nobody gets to eat until we talk about the numbers. And we said grace. Everybody said what they're thankful for. Okay, so what's your A1C? What's your PSA? What's your blood pressure? I made everybody fess up. And it wasn't a very happy conversation because I was withholding the turkey. But I think that, I took an opportunity where I had my family all together in one place to force them to talk about this really important stuff that nobody talks about. So that's why I think we're doing this now, because tomorrow's Thanksgiving and it's a great opportunity to talk. And I started doing some research. And did you know that 80% of heart attacks and strokes are preventable? That 30 to 50% of all cancer cases are preventable. And that a lot of it is because we don't know, what's going on with our families. And so we start out, and get these diseases, maybe even unnecessarily, something we could have prevented had we known our family history and had we just known the basic numbers. So let's talk about them. Mo, will you help us figure out what the numbers are? We kind of made a list of the numbers, right?
Sure. Well, let's go through it. If somebody wants to pull it up or call it out, I don't know if you have a graphic for it.
A1C.
Ooh. All right.
Yeah,
Val, I'm gonna call on Val first. How do you explain to lay people what A1C represents? Because we talk about it a lot, and I can talk about the components of it, but how do you tell lay people what it is and why it matters?
Well, typically, what I tell patients is it averages what your blood sugar has been over 3 months. And so there's a protein that attaches to your blood. And, before when we had to check blood sugars, we tell people not to eat after midnight so we could check the blood sugar. But that was just a moment in time. And so if someone had a really good blood sugar, that still didn't say that they were not pre-diabetic or diabetic. But when A1C came on board, I mean, it was like life-changing for a lot of people because it actually gave us a window into what was going on for the last 3 months in their lives. So little simple blood tests and from your finger, and they can let you know what's going on. And I absolutely love it because that's how I found out that I had type 2 diabetes.
And it's important for people to know because you could go to a clinic or something and get a finger stick, right? But the finger stick is not an A1C, and I think that's an important differentiation. A1C gives us that full range. It's not just the ice cream you ate last night. It's how's your body processing sugar over the last 3 months. How's that pancreas functioning? And so a normal A1C less than 5.7. Right? Less than 5.7, if you are not a diabetic, is where you need to be. Anything more than 5.7, you're getting into that pre-diabetic range, especially if you have a family history. So 5.7 to 6.5 is pre-diabetic or in that diabetic range. Anything higher than 6.5. So you want to be, if you're looking at numbers, less than 5.7 for your A1C. And if you think that it's high, go see your doctor. And we should talk about some of the signs and symptoms of diabetes, right? It's really rapid weight loss, increased thirst. You're urinating a lot, especially at night. If those things are you need to get checked for diabetes. So you got to talk.
People don't know they have it. They're
walking around with the sugar, no idea.
And the data shows also that Blacks are twice as likely to die from diabetes than white people. Twice as likely, right?
And the other thing, Ricky, I read an article yesterday that looked at BMI as not being an adequate indicator for when we should start screening for diabetes, because we could have diabetes with a normal BMI. Right. And that brings up a different conversation altogether, I'm sure. But when you look at who should even start screening, it's the question you got to ask your doctor or your nurse practitioner or your healthcare provider is, how do I know if I'm at risk for diabetes? And can we check my A1C as a part of my normal laboratory panel? Can we add that on? Yeah. And that's a fasting blood value.
Can I add one thing? Also, I want people to be in terms of your life, because I'm not a big sweet eater, and so when you don't eat a lot of sweets, you think, I'm not in danger for diabetes, right. And you can get sugar in a lot of different ways, right? Yes. You can drink your sugar, okay? And they hide sugar in a lot of processed foods. And so you've got to make sure that you have to look at your total diet, not just how many cupcakes or candy that you're eating. You've got to, okay, if I'm drinking alcohol, am I drinking mixer? I could drink. If I drink juices, there's a lot of sugar in juices. Right. So we've got to be careful about how sugar can get delivered in many different ways, not just through candies and cupcakes.
Right.
Talk about that.
Tender rice, right? How much rice do we eat every day?
I have a quick question. Hi, everyone. I'm Haley. I have a question too about BMI, because I've recently heard so much too about how that's like not a great indicator for Black people because our bodies are different, and that indicator is actually somewhat obsolete for the Black person. So I'd love to hear more about that in terms of that being like even if something that we think about in terms of our health.
Well, what is it? First of all, body mass index. Your height, your weight.
Yep, and your sex, right? It's a statistical ratio of those things. The challenge is that there's discrepancies, so it can misclassify Black individuals, particularly as overweight, because we may have higher muscle mass, greater bone density, and things that contribute, as opposed to just the amount of adiposity or fat that we actually have. That being said, we are at higher risk for chronic illnesses. We do. As a community, we do have on average a higher BMI, and obesity is an issue in our community, but BMI just may not be the best measurement of it, right? Like, I don't want to throw away to separate the salt from the stew. We got to talk about what we're eating and high blood pressure and being overweight. but the BMI is not the end all be all. And
Yeah.
I mean, a classic example, you could look at Lizzo, for example. I love watching her. She's a masterclass in fitness and endurance, right? She can out dance, outrun, outplay the lot of us, but her BMI is elevated, and her blood work is normal. And so, we got to talk about it in more than just that sort of monolithic, measurement that goes back to, it predates all of us. It's archaic in nature.
Yeah. But interestingly, when you take chemotherapy, they use your BMI to determine how much of the chemotherapy that you get. So,
Ooh, you think that contributes to increased toxicity?
Right?
I'm just thinking now, since you're saying that.
I'm thinking it too.
Yeah.
Definitely something to be paid attention to.
Yeah.
It
That-
may
you
be
opened
part
up
of the
a
reason.
whole-
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but it may be part of the reason why, when you look at how many Black women complete the full course of all their therapies, that number is somewhere around 58 or 60%. Like, we don't even complete. We tap out. We have too many other side effects, adverse reactions. It may be due to increased toxicity due to overdosing. So that's a really, really good point, Val.
Yeah, I know. I had my chemo they had to dial back on the dosage. For me.
Yeah.
Haley, that was a great question. I think that's
Yeah.
and I think we did a program about BMI a few months ago, and it really, because we talked about how Black women need to look at their overall numbers, as Dr. Mo was saying, instead of just that one metric, because I think BMI was actually originally calculated on a white male. And so
they all were. All this stuff was.
Surprise.
when you think about it in that context, you're comparing a Black female to a white male in terms of body shape, density, things like that. And so we can see it's like trying to measure a book with a liquid measuring cup. It's not going to happen. Right? It's not the right tool to do it. And so look at all your numbers, not just that BMI.
And we're not the only outliers. Black people are not the only outliers. Asians tend to weigh less but have more body fat. Wow. Right. But because they weigh less, that algorithm is skewed for them also. So, it's problematic for more than just Black and brown individuals too.
Wow. And Ellis, you brought up a good point when we were talking about the show about waist measurement.
Mm-hmm.
What is your waist measurement? So, I guess when you have fat around your middle, that could cause heart disease, right? And so, I mean, you could be a thin person but have a big middle. Yep. Right?
Yeah.
Or your BMI may not reflect that, or your weight may not reflect it, but your body shape is where you're carrying the weight, could be subject to disease.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So Dr. Mo, I know, and Valerie, you could talk about this, the two types of fat that we carry around our midsection, that visceral and that subcutaneous fat, and how there are two different types of fat in our midsection, and one of them is much more harmful to our organs, causes that nasty word that we hear all the time, inflammation, and then we know that is a jumping off point to other diseases, including cancers. And so when we're talking about how that cascading effect, BMI is really at that, but obesity more so is kind of that jumping off point. And if you're registered, if you're diagnosed with obesity, and I always say obesity is a diagnosis, not a description.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, I love that. Yep.
So if you get that diagnosis of obesity, we can reverse it, but understanding that if we don't do anything about it, then that could be the jumping off to a myriad of other health related issues.
Yeah. I will say, I need people to recognize, though, if you see it in your chart, right? Because we are required to put in the diagnoses. When we see a patient, what do you have? And categorize, list those things. It's not a judgment, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you see that, because I've had patients that, why does it say I'm obese or morbid obesity or these things? It's because of what the numbers are, but it's not the sum total of who you are. And so when you see that in your chart, you need to put it in perspective and not just assume your doctor is biased or your doctor's calling you fat or folk. It really has to do with how you have that encounter with that physician. If you go in for a cold and your doctor's harping on some other things, right, like talking about your weight and not acknowledging your issues, then there may be some bias there, some implicit or explicit bias that needs to be addressed. But just having a diagnosis of obesity does not mean that your doctor is, doing something wrong. It's required for us to itemize the things.
Yeah, I think there's work to be done in why we hear those things as judgments, right? And like why it becomes this painful thing to hear versus like the dentist telling me I need a filling. Do you know what I mean? Like one of them feels much more intense. You're telling me like, why is it the body image that we've struggled with for so long? But like, I think there's work for us to do as people. And that's again, what you can do at your kitchen table is to make these conversations more common and more friendly. So that when you hear these things from a doctor, it's not this alarming thing. It's like, oh no, it's another problem I can fix in my life or whatever.
I love that, Haley, because I was thinking, so what if I was at the Thanksgiving table and I was asking a relative about my great grandmother? How could I say it in a way that it's not
right? It's hard,
but I want to know more information. So if I said, so tell me about great grandmother. What was her body frame? You know, like what did she look like, and did she take any pills that you know of, or did you ever see her take a needle, or did she say she has sugar instead of diabetes? Because that's what they used to say way back when.
That's what they still say. They call it sugar.
Yeah.
What makes you think maybe it's like we talk at the kitchen table, but we also go to the bathroom and see what we're taking? You know what I mean?
Yeah, interesting. You know, when my dad died, I did go to the medicine cabinet because he died so quickly. And I did look at his pills. I took everything out and I went to took it to my doctor and said, what is all this stuff? And I got an explanation of things that I didn't know he had. He had colon cancer, but didn't tell us. So literally, I found out he was sick on Friday. He died on Monday. It was that bad. So we didn't, and he knew it, but he just didn't tell us. But when I look back at all the pills he was taking, he was taking a lot of stuff: high blood pressure medicine, high triglycerides, high cholesterol. Like he had all the stuff that we had never talked about. So not only did he not talk about the colon cancer that killed him, but he didn't talk about all these ailments he probably had for years, because some of those bottles were in the medicine cabinet for years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
I know I'm going to sort of practice tomorrow asking some of my family in the context of strength, of endurance, of wanting to know the history of what runs through my veins from that sort of being proud of our lineage and our history perspective, right? I'm gonna play the proud of my history.
That's a great framework, but that's a great framework to make it like approachable for everyone.
It is. You know, you sit down with Nana and say, Nana, you don't, nobody makes it to 80 being a punk, right? Like, but tell me about some of the things that you have overcome, because I know you got some stories. Come on, hit me with
yeah, that's wonderful.
You know, and let her tell stories of strength, and then you can start to tease out some of those other things. Oh, did you ever have a surgery, Nana? You know, I have some friends who had a surgery. They're afraid, you know, and you gotta like get it in there because we don't like to talk about these things.
I know, I don't know why we don't talk about it, but we need to. So, all right. So, what else can we talk about tomorrow? Like blood pressure, right? Blood pressure, and all of these things. Also, blood pressure, diabetes, all these things give you kidney disease. And like they all kind of are connected. The heart disease, right? And like dying. So blood pressure. So, you know, how many people? I know so many people that are taking blood pressure medication and have been for years. You know, for years. They started in their 30s taking blood pressure medication. What's that about? And people don't talk about it.
You know,
I have a blood pressure cuff in my house, right? So and I take and I don't have a history of how I personally don't, but my mother does, right? And so, you know, some of those things that if you know that family history, you can kind of say, okay, well, maybe I need to start monitoring. And if I start seeing over time, and so if you do that, you start seeing if your blood pressure starts to rise over time, you can get ahead of it, right? You can start changing your diet and start talking to your primary care provider before they have to start talking about lisinopril, right? So
yeah, because you know they're quick to pull it out, and I'm they, and we are quick to pull out that prescription because it's a silent killer, right? People don't realize that when your blood pressure is elevated, your heart is working overtime. The organs that need that blood are being robbed of that blood because there are challenges within your blood vessels. The vascular supply is challenged. It can lead to strokes. It can lead to kidney failure. It can lead to coronary artery disease. It can lead to heart attacks. It can lead to so many things. Like it's the little subway system of the body. It's the transit system. And when that blood pressure is elevated, it causes problems, and you don't know until it's way too late that the tracks on the train are messed up, right? Next thing you know, you got an accident going on. So normal blood pressure, and the numbers have tightened. So as of, I want to say 2017, and maybe again in 2021, but they've tightened. Normal blood pressure now is two numbers. It's systolic over the diastolic. It's a fraction.
Yep.
Less than 120 and less than 80. So we used to say normal was 120 over 80. Now it's less than 120, less than 80. Once you hit 120, it's considered elevated blood pressure. And now it's, it's still normal, but it's getting up there. And you need to be mindful. If you're stressed, makes your blood pressure go up to 128, 129, you're about to have hypertension.
Mhm.
And blood pressure is, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's something that you could check at home. You know what I mean?
Oh,
Like,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
You could do really regularly,
And you should.
Yeah.
Well,
something-
I have white coat syndrome, and I got that when I had cancer. So I remember going to the to my surgeon, plastic surgeon, and he was this really like beautiful man that I probably had a crush on. Everybody, all my friends wanted to go to that appointment with me, but my blood pressure was like 180.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. 180 or something. And ask Auntie Janice about that. But my blood pressure would be like so elevated. And he actually sent me to the hospital one time because my pressure was so high. And I had to really learn, hold on, wait a minute. And there you go. But I had to get one of those so I could take it at home. So I take it at home before I go to the doctor, because I know when I get to the doctor, it's going to be high.
Yeah.
And I never really knew my real blood pressure until I did at home in my house.
And that's important, I think, that your doctor believes you and that you are able to do that and advocate for yourself in that way. Saying, hey, listen, I check this regularly. I'm not just, refuting what you got because I don't want the pills you're going to push on me, but saying, no, I'm in charge of my health. I'm the CEO, like you say, Ricky, the CEO of your own health.
Yeah.
Right. And I know my numbers. Here it is. I've been checking this. So your number is the outlier. You're the anomaly.
Right.
It's because of, what's been going on. And that is a really powerful thing to a doctor who sees patients room after room after room of people who don't quite know where they've been and what's going on and what pill they're taking. And, knowing yourself is so, so very powerful.
Yeah. And I think people get upset if the numbers that their blood pressure is different from what they get in the doctor's office. And so what I tell people is, because you're taking it on a regular basis, the numbers may not be exact, but if you have some elevation, whatever the number is, if it's elevated from the last time that you've taken it, that's where the concern is. Not necessarily that the numbers are exactly like what's in your physician's office.
And the only way
everything to be perfect, that's not it. The
only way to also know if something has changed is to do this regularly, right? We have to put these routines into our lives.
Like checking your breath.
Someone recently told me that, I forget who it was, but they said like their birthday's on this day, and every day of that month is when they do all of their checks, right? And
Wonderful.
It's just like they remember it because they just remember their birthday. So like for me, it'd be the 30th every month is the day that I check all my things. I thought that was a really nice strategy to keep up with it. Yeah.
I love that.
Maybe you do that for everybody in the family. You pick a day of the month where everybody says, okay, everybody's going to check their pressure, check their whatever, and make that like a family thing where you'd have we have a family group text. So you put in the group text, I checked my stuff today.
Yeah.
I even think now I obviously work for my mother, but we have a shared calendar. So I can put things on her calendar to make her recognize or do things. You know what I mean? And so it's like, why not? We all operate on these calendars in some form or fashion. Like, why not use these shared calendars with our families or with whoever we want to, make sure we're holding accountable.
You see who the boss is here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm slowly learning that. So I think there's we want to come back to a couple of things. So one, we haven't talked about cholesterol. That's
right.
That's a big one. We haven't talked about fat. So we're going to circle back around to fat, and then we're going to talk about cholesterol. And then after we talk about cholesterol, we're going to talk about some screenings that you need to have done as well.
Yes.
We're going to talk about it all, but
okay.
Fat, cholesterol, then let's get to those screenings.
Cool. Go, Mo.
Okay, so all fat is not created equal, even though it feels like it is, and we hate it in all the places where we see it. But there's good fat and there's bad fat, right? And so let's talk about essential fat. Essential fat is the kind we get in through our vitamins. It's the kind that we get in through avocados and through our good fatty fish. That type of fat is good. Brown fat is good. Brown fat burns energy and it helps us to maintain our core temperature. So when you're doing your cardio, right, when you're doing your exercises, you're burning that fat. And so that's the kind of fat you want to burn. But the white fat, so the kind when you cut into a ribeye, you see all that white fat, that's the kind that's not so good, right? Because it stores energy and it stores sugar. It stores the hormones, and in response to those hormones, it creates cortisol levels that are elevated, growth hormones. That type of fat contributes to weight gain. And we manage it. You can see it in your abdomen and your belly. Like Ricky, I think you mentioned looking at the waist circumference, right? And how the fat is distributed. When that fat is distributed in your upper body, your upper abdomen, that type of fat is indicative of what we call visceral fat. And you have a higher risk for diabetes and hypertension as opposed to intra-abdominal fat, which is inside the abdomen. So that visceral fat, high risk for diabetes, hypertension, hypertriglyceridemia, that beer belly is not so good, right? And so we got to look at the body fat distribution rather than the BMI even.
Yep. Okay. Fantastic. So, and this is one that's near and dear to me because cholesterol, right? We know it, and I got a family history of cholesterol as well, and my cholesterol is elevated. Thankfully, I've not been put on medication as of yet, but it's something I always, I'm really, really sensitive about and have to monitor. And I should be doing a better job with my diet. We're keeping it real here tonight before Thanksgiving. But you have that; those are numbers that can clog. So what Dr. Mo is talking about, that white fat, right? So when you fry that bacon, if you leave that bacon grease and let it sit there on the pan, it's going to turn white. That coffee mug that you put in your refrigerator. I mean, come on, black folks. I know.
Yes, there we go. Or leave it on the counter.
I'm on your block if I'm not in your house. If I'm on your block, so you got that coffee mug. Now that it turns white, that's not good because it floats around in our bloodstream, and then it can clog. It can cause that blockage somewhere, and then heart attack. All those things can result. And we know what's the number one killer of Black Americans is heart disease, right? And so we've got to be careful about it.
Ellis, we used to tell people that the HDL cholesterol, the good cholesterol, was going to protect you. And the reality is that for Black people, even having an elevated HDL may not be as protective as we thought. Mm-hmm. And so overall, it is really best to make sure that you have a balanced cholesterol, that it is as low as possible. And it is uncomfortable, right? Because we like to eat what we like to eat. Mm-hmm. And, we like to season it the way we like to season it. And, Black folks do food. We do. I talked to some of my other colleagues and their Thanksgiving dinners, and I'm like, well, we got this, greens, beans, potato, tomato, you name it, right?
I've been cooking all day, okay? And I can't say that anything I have cooked today is a good thing. Maybe the kale, I cooked it with turkey sausage, but the dressing probably wasn't a good thing. The apple pie has a lot of sugar. The cranberries, oh my God, the cranberries have so much sugar. So I know that Thanksgiving should be an anomaly. And do the wrong things tomorrow, but it should be a once a year thing, or maybe you can do Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, right?
And let's talk about that. Let's talk about balance, because nobody's saying you can't enjoy your life and your food, right, Val? Like, how do folks find balance, and what does a balanced diet really kind of look like in practice, like in real life?
Yeah, I think that, and we always talk about the 5 fruits and vegetables. Mm-hmm. And then one thing that I never tell my patients is don't eat, because I think that if you encourage the good, then good always wins, and so the bad stuff just finds its way out. And so I start by just talking about what's the good stuff, what's the fruits and the vegetables that you can start out eating, mm-hmm. and before you know it, it just takes over, and they don't want that stuff. But I think we start out with the negative, thinking that it's going to motivate people.
What are you going to be deprived of? What do you have to give up? Right.
Right. Exactly. But they, usually when you say, okay, 5 fruits and vegetables, you don't even have to tell people to give up stuff. It's something about your mind and your body that comes together and says, oh, we don't need all of that. And it just automatically happens and people feel better. So I think like even when we're around the table tomorrow, maybe that's not always a subject.
Tomorrow's really hard.
But maybe today it really is hard.
No,
Like,
you-
enjoy this, but there's, we can talk about food later, but enjoy. But what we can do on Thanksgiving is walk, right?
Yes.
Take a walk. There you go.
How about it? Before or
Dinner
after?
and after. I would say take a
Before,
walk.
before and after, I would say,
Before
if you're going to do it after, you got to do it within 15 minutes. So
Right, exactly right.
It's got to
And
be at
use
least-
smaller plates too. You know
Yes.
what I mean? Like nobody's saying you got to have the big platter this size. You can use a smaller paper plate.
I love
And I've
that.
tricked my family that way. You eat less, and if you go back for a little bit more, you don't feel as bad because you used a smaller plate and your portions were smaller. Now, if it's pile high, it's a different story. But you can trick your mind sometimes by finish that first plate of food, and then if you want a little something extra, go back and get small portions of it. So portion control is a big part of being able to eat what you like.
Yeah, I just wrote an article for Black Doctor about this very topic in terms of how to indulge how to eat the foods that you like during the holiday season and not gain that average 3 to 5 pounds that most people gain throughout the holidays. And that was it. Number one was taking a walk. Number two was your portion size. Go from that 9-inch plate down to the 7-inch salad plate. What you're going to put on your plate. Start with the vegetables first, because I know a lot of times we go to the turkey and the ham and the carbs and we got the rice and the gravy. There's no room for the vegetables. Go to the vegetables first. Your vegetables should be at least 50% of your plate, and your meats, your proteins a quarter, and then your carbs a quarter. So if you can create that plate that way, drinking a lot of water during the day, because sometimes when we think we're hungry, we're really thirsty. Our body is really dehydrated. So drink water, and that will kind of carve some of those cravings. Also eat a salad before you get to the big meal. Get those vegetables in your body. It'll help suppress some of that appetite. You won't eat as much. Know what time you're eating, right? We get the cravings. We want to get that last plate when we sit in the bed and we go straight to sleep. That throws off your rhythm. That throws off your blood sugar. It could really have some serious problems on its own.
You preaching?
I know.
Right.
You know,
It's like that afternoon nap, though.
Oh, look,
It's me with my late night pie. So I understand.
you gotta do that. I mean, so especially when we're talking about being pre-diabetic and knowing those numbers, that walk after your meal can help regulate your blood sugar so much. So please. So
I find that when I'm exercising more, I actually crave healthier food. I just do.
True.
There's something about not wanting to ruin what I just worked hard doing, It feels better.
Yeah, and I think sometimes when we delay, like we eat that one piece of pie and we're not satisfied and we want to go back, something in our brain says you'll never get this again, and so we're eating like we'll never get that again. But I think if we delay and say, you know what, I can wait a couple of hours or 3 hours. And then when it gets there, you don't want it. But something at that moment says you gotta have it, because the world's gonna end in another minute, and you gotta have that.
Because so-and-so, Uncle so-and-so is gonna eat that last pie, right? You gotta get them for them. But
and like you are gonna have it again. It's not gonna end. I mean, like
and you can cook it again. Let's be honest. You can make it every week if you wanted to, but
But we don't say that. We're like, it's over. This is the last one.
So you guys, we got to talk about screenings.
I was going to ask Ellis about that. I have a question because you're the man on the panel here, and gender. Like, how do we talk across gender about our health? How do I talk to my uncles? I got some uncles coming, and I don't want to be just like, hey, how's your PSA? Like, how do I? how do we do it?
How's it hanging? Right?
And I like what the commenter said. You got to be willing to have those uncomfortable conversations, right? And so there's got to be that one person, that catalyst. And so for me, it's going to be me. I know my uncle's in town. I got cousins, nephews, and all everybody come in, and I'm going to have some conversations. Thankfully, one of my cousins that's coming in, he is a medical doctor, and so he'll back me up. But I'm going to lead in with that with the men and say, look, it cannot be driven by yes, still women be the chief medical officers of your family, but you've got to be together in doing and having those conversations. And so that's why I went and I told my wife, I was like, look, I got a blood pressure cuff. I got a pulse oximeter. And I got all these things because I realized that I wanted to be here and I wanted to be as healthy as possible. There's a phrase that one of our other hosts used to say, I want to increase my health span, right? So your lifespan is from birth to death, but your health span is how many healthy years you have while you're alive. And so I want to increase that health span. And the only way you can do that is by making sure you're doing what you need to do, knowing your numbers, and then eating healthily. So yes, there's going to be some things I'm going to miss. I'm going to have a moment of silence for hot wings, right? Because I'm going to have it, and it's delicious. We were talking about that white fat. You said that steak with the white fat and the ribeye. Woo! Dr. Mo, gotta tell you. But I'd rather be here as long and as healthy as possible. So I'm gonna make those sacrifices. So last night, guess what? I put some salmon on the grill. And we had salmon, so that's good fats.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to try to substitute some of the foods that we eat tomorrow on Thanksgiving. I'm still going to give me some greens, macaroni and cheese. I'm going to get it. I'm just not going to pile that plate as high as I used to when I was younger, trying to out eat everybody, because it's not necessary. And I'll still get the flavor in my mouth. I'll still get the flavor without
that. Yeah.
Well, there's also like, I feel as if, I'm 30, and it's like, it's good for me to start thinking about doing these things now versus waiting 10 years until it's an issue. And then now I need to do it versus now I can make those choices proactively. So I think it's even, we're talking about being uncomfortable. It's going to be uncomfortable with your old people. It's going to be uncomfortable with your young people, but that's okay.
Yeah. But
I've never seen anybody change when they're comfortable. I've never seen it.
Right.
It never happens in the middle. It always happens on the extremes of the bell curve. You're right. Nothing ever changes or happens exciting in the middle.
And trust me, you don't want to have a devastating disease to make you change. I mean, I had to give up filet mignon with Béarnaise sauce because I had breast cancer. Like, don't wait till you get sick or till you get diabetes or till you get high blood pressure to don't let that be the catalyst for your change. Do it ahead of time and maybe you could prevent it. But, the numbers even for prostate cancer, twice as likely to die. 1 in 6 Black men get it. And colon cancer, we're getting it younger. Prostate cancer, if you get a PSA, your number, you could be okay. Colon cancer, yeah, 4 for prostate. Colon cancer, though, a colonoscopy can prevent colon cancer.
Yes.
And now we're seeing that Black men are getting younger and well before they would get that first colonoscopy at 50. If you have a family history, you got to talk about that. You got to see who had it and know that, because you could prevent it.
It's the most preventable cancer of all. It's the most preventable cancer.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's making me think too that breast cancer is something that I think about all the time now, but I don't think about all the other things that are in my family history, right? Yeah. Don't just stop once you hear this one thing that you might get. There could be others, and we should just remember that in these conversations.
Yeah, and put them on the table. You got everybody at the table. So everybody, you could build your family tree at the table tomorrow, right?
And let's not
diseases,
You're absolutely right, Ricky. Put it on that family tree, on the T-shirts, on the literal family tree, the scroll at the family reunion, right?
Right.
I want to give a little bit of weight and importance to the fact that screening is work. It is. It takes time, and it's something that doesn't just happen. Because what we tend to think is, it'll just, I'll get that. Yeah, I'll get that mammogram. Next thing you know, 2 years has gone by because we had a pandemic and you haven't gotten that mammogram, right? You got to take some time out and really carve out that time. I mean, places have Saturday hours. Everybody wants to return to screening, and so listening to your body is super important, because if you have a problem, it's no longer a screening, right? No, screening is when nothing's wrong.
Right.
It's when you go to the doctor and nothing is wrong. And that's why people are like, why do I go? Nothing's wrong.
Right.
It's to check to stay healthy. So you got to do that and put in that screening. Mammogram should start at 40, unless you have a family history, right, of 3 or more relatives on one side, or someone young in the family with breast cancer, and then you start 10 years younger than the youngest person. So if cousin Jackie was diagnosed at 35, everybody need to be starting at 25.
And Haley's got a grandmother and a mother.
Right. So we start earlier,
I started my PSA at 35 because my father had it and my grandfather had it. And so I was hyper vigilant about that. And so you got to know that number. That for men, that number is 4. It's under 4. And also want to give 2 caveats for that for Black men. So we're going to talk about Black men in particular. One, If you see, even if you're under 4 and you see a significant jump from 1 year to the next year,
Right.
you may want to think about getting a biopsy, because that significant jump is showing there's something going on.
Yeah.
If you go from a 0.7 to a 2.5 in 1 year, you might want to go get a check, even though you're under 4. So go get that check. Number 2, Black men has shown, when all things are held constant, if we catch it at the same time as white men, we actually do better in terms of treatment and long-term treatment. So please, please, please get those checks. Understand, if you can catch it early, you have a better outcome than your white counterparts. And finally, we got to get over. I understand the biggest fear for men is that sexual side effect that can happen
Right.
as a result of being treated for prostate cancer. You got to let that go. Would you rather
Right.
be 6 feet under, or would you rather have to deal with trying to, regain a sexual functioning? I'd rather be here and working on that than slow singing and flower bringing.
Yeah.
Right. Then dead. Right.
And the other thing that I think is, we are our brother's keepers. So I'm a breast cancer survivor, so that kind of predisposes my brother to having prostate cancer. So if my dad had prostate cancer, that might predispose me to having breast cancer. It's all relative.
connected.
I mean, yeah. And so
Connected.
when we have these conversations, you really are helping each other. But I don't know, it seems like it's difficult for us to have those conversations. Also, I'm reading more literature now, Mo, that says there's a growing body of knowledge that women that have had breast cancer somehow end up with colon cancer. I don't know what the correlation is, but hey, I've seen quite a few people that are breast cancer survivors that
Yeah.
end up with colon cancer.
You think about it like this, and the answer is yes, but the screening guidelines haven't quite caught up. The general consensus is that once a woman's been diagnosed with breast cancer, within a year, I'm talking to her about getting a colonoscopy. I'm like, okay, have you got one?
Right.
But when the cells make mistakes, and enough mistakes that a cancer happens, the possibility for it to happen in other places is increased.
Yeah.
And so I see many patients, they have a breast cancer and then they get a skin cancer, or they get a colon and something else, because those repair mechanisms go wrong in not just the breast, but in other places as well. And so you got to look at that and be vigilant, even more so after diagnosis, that, okay, let me make sure I go and see that dermatologist and check the places that I can't see, my back, my scalp. We know that black and brown people can get cancers in a lot of different areas. And so, we have to stay up on it, because once the cells make enough mistakes that a cancer forms, it could very well happen again in other places.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It makes you got to be hyper vigilant. You got to just,
Mhm.
and we can like, think about it. We have this opportunity to do it. So why wouldn't you do it? I mean, maybe because I've had cancer, I can speak passionately about, if you can avoid this thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
do what you got. Do what you got to do to avoid it, because it's not fun.
Yeah.
I have a question for everybody. It's 2022, almost 2023, right? Everybody has access to the internet and I feel like we have more at our fingertips than ever before, but are there still so many health myths out there in the community that we need to combat?
Yes.
How do we combat misinformation? Because I feel like there are still, and I don't know if we have time to even call out those, and maybe people who are watching can put them in the chat, but when do we get to the truth? How do we get to the truth?
I know.
And how do people not be embarrassed about having diabetes, hypertension, and cancer, so that you can tell the story? So we're in church, and we pray for God to heal us, and we sing, and He's a healer. But how would people know if we don't ever tell the story? African Americans are people of witness. Pastors at the pulpit, can I get a witness? But where are the witnesses to say that we've overcome this through a surgery,
Mhm.
chemotherapy, taking medications,
Mhm.
going to a psychiatrist? Come on.
Right. Hello.
All right.
How do we know? Because we don't tell the story. We
Yeah.
look as if, we came out our mom's wombs, looking good and all of this, and we never struggled. So people never tell the story that, I had hypertension and I didn't even know it was happening. I kept having headaches and all of that. We never tell the story. And so people never know. that you can make it.
And we're hurting our kids. We're hurting
Absolutely.
our kids with that. We're hurting our kids by not sharing these stories.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
and we're hurting our kids. We have to and we could be preventing a cousin from having this. Could be we could be saving somebody in our families if we talked about it,
But how do we set this atmosphere? How do we do that? How do we?
Well, I think it's funny because I'm thinking two things. I'm thinking, one, social media has a huge role in this and why we don't see anybody struggling or having a bad day or
Yeah.
But it's on the flip side, it could actually be used in the same way. What if we did videotape ourselves on our way to these screenings, right? What if we did publicize the other version of this conversation? Because I think that, we have social media is not going anywhere, so we might as well use it for good. And I think that might be a way.
I love it.
Do a Facebook Live on your way to the doctor. Right?
I filmed my mammogram last year. I did a whole video and I got called back for a callback too, and I think that people do need to see it. You're right, Haley, because we used to think of the internet as places where people went to complain about everything, right? You had a bad experience, you go into the net and now it's all about looking good and having this facade,
being perfect,
right?
Having a perfect life. And
there's a subset of social media that's dedicated though to realism and to being real and showing pictures as they are and not editing them and doing all the what do they call the screens where you make yourself look all twinkly and technicolor and stuff. And I think you're right. We do have to do so much more of that type of honesty. There was a study that came out, I want to say last year, that said 90% of adolescents that were in this study had some awareness of health history, but only 35% or so had actually asked anybody about it. Right. So they heard it through the grapevine, but they didn't know how to ask about it. And so we have to model that for our families. It has to be us taking the heat and having an uncomfortable conversation and getting told by Nana, that's your business. And, kind of getting into it a little bit to empower that next generation to even want to bring up these topics, because they're not gonna if we don't.
Yeah.
So a couple of things I would tell the younger generation this: you control what comes into your feed, right? With every time you double click and you like something, you're telling the algorithm on that app, I want more of this stuff. So if you want more health related stuff, content, you double click on it and you tell TikTok or Instagram or Facebook that you want more of this delivered into your timeline. That's one way you can drive what happens, what's in your timeline. Number two, we got to fight our way. I'm going to keep banging that drum. We're going to fight our way through these uncomfortable conversations. We got to fight our way through it. And just because Big Mama said, oh, that ain't none of your business, it is my business, because you are my business. And I want you to be here.
Yeah.
And you have those conversations. You have those conversations with your children, and you give them the language, and you start them early on how to have those conversations about health earlier on in life. And so we have to work on both ends. I got to talk to my mom about her health, and I got to talk to my son about how to keep himself healthy.
Right.
No, and to add to that, I think it's what makes those conversations feel taboo? Because I personally, despite being 30, I have no social media, and I don't think most things are taboo. But I understand that that's not everyone's feeling, and people do. Is it the judgment? What is that? Because that's where the work again has to be done.
Yeah.
I think it's in the health literacy.
Yeah, and maybe
you don't know.
When you don't know, you don't want to take any questions about it. It's like asking about money. You don't have it. You don't know. You can't answer those questions. And it becomes a stay in your place. I remember we didn't talk about money a lot because we didn't have it. And so if you don't know about your health, you're less likely to answer those questions. So I think the issue of health literacy, and one of the things this programming and BDO helps to solve, is the challenge of just educating people about what is your health before your disease even happens. What does health look like for you? Right. And so that's pretty wonderful.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
I want to bring up another number. Before we go. Steps, counting your steps.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah.
Right? We're supposed to do 10,000 steps a day. And a lot of us have these things. All my white friends have those things.
Mm-hmm.
Or have it on the Apple Watch or whatever, right? All my white friends count their steps. And they're like, I have a friend at the end of the day, if she hasn't done the right steps, she stands still in her house.
Wow.
That's amazing. But that's so hard to do.
It is.
His phone does it. right? Start
Right.
counting your steps.
Yes,
Your
good.
phone does it. You got a whole lot of wearables.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's not to know how many steps you've taken in a single day. You can increase it by parking further away from the door instead of
Right.
trying to drive around to get the closest parking space.
Right,
Park further away and get those steps from the back
Yeah.
of the parking lot to
Right.
the store. It's okay. It's going to take you another 30 seconds or so, but those
Right.
steps add up over time. I
Mm-hmm.
would say, and we talked about, and I know we got to wrap up, so I want to get everybody's final thoughts
Yeah.
as we're wrapping up because we got to get to Dr. Gigi. We got
I know Dr. Gigi's going to talk too about food, right?
yeah, we're going to be talking about nutrition. She's got a dietitian certified weight specialist coming on just
Oh,
at the top of the hour. So we're going to talk more about food. We're going to continue the conversation, but I love this.
Yeah.
This is fantastic. This is what exactly what we wanted to do. So Ricky, I'm going to call you out now on live. We need to do this every year before Thanksgiving.
Let's do it. Yeah, let's do it before
This is-
Christmas, Thanksgiving,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And Mother's Day brunch. Like, think about all
I
that
love
when you
it.
do bad. But just, it's okay to eat bad tomorrow.
Yeah.
But do what? Count your steps. And maybe that's the thing, a number to start tomorrow. Just
That's
keep
right.
counting steps tomorrow for the first time, right? Before you eat and after you eat. And it's just like thinking about stuff.
Yeah.
Not putting it in your mouth, but thinking about what you're putting in your mouth.
And the other thing that we're talking about, know your numbers, but really, do we know our doctor's numbers? Do we know what poison control number is? Is there a place in your home where those numbers are so that when you need to talk to your pharmacy, you're not like looking everywhere like I do almost all the time. But putting your number in a place. Who knows who's your emergency contact?
Ooh, we
number?
know.
Do you know what I'm saying? So,
Yes.
knowing your numbers really more than even what we're talking about, because most people can't tell
Which
you.
is a bigger show. We got to do more. So
Wow.
Yeah, and I was-
Yeah.
Yeah, my only final thought is to make these things seen regularly. And that's valid. You put it somewhere in your house or you put it somewhere in your phone so it comes up regularly on your calendar. So it's not something you can put away. You have to deal with these things. And again, that makes you take those necessary steps routinely.
Love it.
I guess my final thought is the change is gradual, right? And so if you're thinking, oh, I'll do it in 2023 or January, and I tell them my patients who are smokers this all the time, you got to practice, right? If you think you're going to stop smoking January 1 and be successful first time, number one, the reality is that 80% of smokers don't stop on the first try, right? It takes 7 up to 8 tries to stop smoking. But how about you start practicing now? And so in preparation for whatever you think your goals and your intentions are going to be for that new year, begin to map it out and start practicing it now. So that way you give yourself some grace if you overeat a little bit, or if you say, because we go extreme, I'm going vegan or whatever, maybe just try to eat more vegetables. Let's just start there. Right? Just start there. Put more veggies on your plate first.
right.
I tell people I'm vegan-ish. I'm vegan-ish. And so I want to just thank everybody for joining us. Thank you all.
Thank
I
you.
want to say real quick to Ariana in the comment section, we have 2 shows on lung cancer on Black Doctor right now. Share those with your aunt. If she won't talk to you about it, say, hey, you might want to take a look at this, and that can get the conversation going. So just send her the videos and let her watch it, and then maybe she'll talk to you. So I did want to give her a shout out, and thank you for sharing. Thank you all for joining. This has been a fantastic panel. We're going to do this again before Christmas. So we're going to do another.
Let's do it. We'll do it.
Yeah. Well, I gotta say it. We hope it's been relatable and reliable and real. That's what we do when the doctor is in. So guess what?
The doctor is in.
Doctor's
Happy
in.
Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Get that walk in.
That's
Get
right.
that walk in.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Walk in.